The Pac-12 conference is dead, or at the very least, it's gone on life support, which is a much bigger deal than you could possibly imagine. Because for years, that conference has given us some of the best track and field programs in the entire nation, like the Oregon Ducks, on the men's and women's sides. But that's all about to become a thing of the past. And I get it. Most people think of track as an individualized sport. But if you're a fan of college track and field, you notice that all the athletes are wearing team uniforms. They compete for conference championships and national team titles, just like everyone else in all of college sports. And the teams that do it most often get to become dynasties in their own right. But clearly things change. And now, USC, UCLA, Washington, and of course, Oregon are about to join the Big Ten. The same conference with Rutgers, which is in the state of New Jersey. If you combine that with Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and Arizona State all going to the Big 12 at the same time, the Pac-12 only has 4 teams left. Not much of a conference to play with. The truth is that football is king when it comes to college sports, and whatever happens to the conferences is always in their best interest. What that also means is it's probably not in the best interest of everybody else. That includes track and field. And of course, nobody on ESPN is talking about what all this means for the track community. But that's what you have me for, to tell you. So here is what conference realignment really means for the sport of track and field. And I'm warning you, things are about to get pretty ugly out there. To be totally honest, not every college team is even going to survive this. And the ones who do are going to have to deal with the consequences. And trust me, no team is safe. But you don't have to take my word for it, because I am not alone in seeing the freight train coming. Josh Pate of CBS Sports said himself that college football is going to be fine after all this. But we cannot say the same for all the other non-revenue generating sports. Unfortunately, track and field is near the top of that list. And I'll get around to the one thing that ESPN actually did say just a little bit later. There's a real reason why conference realignment threatens track and field teams specifically. But I don't want to get too deep into the details, so I'll just give you the quick version. The more money that a college spends on football, the more money they have to spend on all the other sports teams. But if the revenue they generate from football specifically is ever interrupted for even a moment, it's never going to be football that's on the chopping block. It'll be all the other sports teams that they're going to look to cut back with. We saw this in 2020 because Clemson and the ACC cut their men's track and field program entirely. They only brought it back because 32,000 people signed a petition. Allegedly, cutting men's track would save them $2 million on their budget. But Clemson track and field is actually legit. Now that the team is back, they just won the ACC championship for the outdoor season. So we can't say it's because the team was losing. And Minnesota, in the Big Ten, actually proposed the same thing. They cut their men's program and then brought it back. But they brought it back without an indoor season. And in order to keep the men's team going at all, they cut men's gymnastics and men's tennis. And Minnesota is pretty good at track as well, in the Big Ten. I bring this up because if schools like them can attempt to cut track and field and not feel bad about it, we know this can happen to just about anyone else. Whether it's the Big Ten, the Big 12, or the SEC who technically started all of this. All this realignment stuff is about big time television money. Remember, that has nothing to do with track and field. You have to put in work if you want to find track and field highlights for the Big 10 or the Big 12. And trust me, I would know. And USC, who's headed now to the Big 10, is the same program that brought us Andre DeGrasse, Rai Benjamin, and Michael Norman. So it's safe to say they clearly take track and field seriously over there. Oregon was actually the last repeat champion on the men's side for the NCAA, not named Florida. Even Washington, who's joining them now in the Big Ten, is a top 25 D1 program. But keep in mind, The SEC was the first super conference when they added Texas A&M and Missouri, and now Oklahoma and Texas. The Lady Longhorns of Texas just won the national meet for Division I by more points than anyone has scored since 1994. Because of college football, we now have 3 super conferences, not just for football, but for track and field as well. All the NIL money that you hear about in football and beyond is really only going to athletes who compete for one of those schools. So at this point, it's basically professional sports disguised as college athletics. The 50 or so teams that compete in the Big Ten, SEC, and now the Big 12 are going to spend more money on football than anyone else. So every other team they have, including track and field, will benefit as much as possible. That's great if you compete for one of those 50 schools. But if you're everybody else, this is where things become really problematic. Because this is all happening on top of a college track and field world that was already very imbalanced. The Florida State men in 2008 are the last team to win an NCAA title that wasn't going to be a member of these 3 super conferences now. And on the women's side, nobody since 1984 has ever won a championship at the NCAA level, at least if you weren't in those 3 conferences now. Division I conferences used to be based off of teams that were actually located in your region. That's why the names sound like the Southeastern Conference or the Atlantic Coast Conference, the Big East Conference, and the Pacific 12 Conference. If you throw in that track and field is a sport that struggles to make any revenue dollars for the athletic department, it made sense to compete with schools that were actually in your area. Buses and planes for transportation don't pay for themselves. And nobody wants to bankroll a team that doesn't make any ticket revenue, much less television money. As a D1 athlete, I remember competing in South Carolina and walking off the track right after running a 200. I put on my warm-ups and then got on a van to ride all the way back to Pennsylvania overnight. At that moment, I didn't even get to shower, but at least I got to compete, which is way more than some athletes are going to get. Because like I said, some teams are going to disappear. I'm almost sure of it. So allow me to address the fallout from all of this, because things are going to get pretty ugly for the other 200 or so teams in Division I track. Heather Dinich of ESPN made it very clear that Stanford, who's still left in what used to be the Pac-12 and is actually really good at track and field, has no idea what they're going to do with their athletics department right now. They used to depend on Pac-12 television money to fund most of their department, and that money is about to be gone. There's no one coming to save them unless the Big Ten or the Big 12 decides to call. I'm not saying that they will cut track and field, but somebody's sports team is likely going to get cut, and track and field will be a part of that conversation. And even if the track team survives, they might have to do it in a form that doesn't resemble the national powerhouse they've become. Big schools realigned to make more football money, and small schools realigned to survive playing football at all. They don't make more football money, and they can't keep up with the costs, so they cut costs by cutting teams. And we know teams do get cut, and they don't come back, because Temple University plays FBS football, and they cut their men's program early in the 2010s. Delaware did the same thing, and their football team was winning D1 FCS championships at the time when they cut it. Maryland is actually in the Big Ten, and they threatened to cut their men's program years ago. They kept the team, but they're not winning anything at all. They also don't have an indoor season or a lot of scholarship money to go with it. We've never seen conference realignment like this, so I honestly can't tell you everything that's going to happen from here on out. What I do know is it's going to affect everyone, because it always does, even if it takes a few years to catch up with us. So in just the last decade, these are some of the crazy things that have already happened. The Mid-Eastern Athletic, used to be a premier D1 HBCU conference, but I said used to. Because of conference realignment, they've all but fell apart. And now, North Carolina A&T and Hampton are members of the Colonial Conference. A&T is actually legit, because they gave us NCAA champions like Randolph Ross and Cambria Sturgis. So yeah, that actually matters. Liberty in Virginia used to own the Atlantic Sun Conference, but now they're headed to the Conference USA. Remember, they're in Virginia, and the Conference USA has UTEP, which is in Texas. So if UTEP is hosting the conference championship meet, do you honestly think that the Liberty Athletics Department is going to put the men's and women's track programs both on a plane to fly to Texas? They're going to be on a very long bus ride, and we've got conference realignment to thank for that. I hope I'm wrong on that one, but I doubt it. Even Division II teams are affected, because as time goes on, they get called up to Division I at a moment's notice to fill in the gaps. JT Smith won the D2 National Championship in the 100-meter dash for 2022, and then his team got called up to D1, which sounds like a great deal till you realize that his team is on probation for 4 years with no NCAA championship participation. He ran the second fastest 100 in the entire nation for D1, and he's not allowed to compete for the D1 NCAA meet. You could argue that it all worked out because he went to the USA Championship and made the 100-meter final, the only collegiate runner to pull that off. And he even beat the man who was the NCAA champion while he was still on probation. Please don't get me wrong. I'm a football fan, and I kind of want to see what UCLA versus Penn State is actually going to look like. But things are getting out of hand, and all these changes we're making only make sense, sorta kinda, for football, and they make no sense for just about anyone else. The consequences for most track teams are actually pretty big, and I've always had a special place in my heart for the underdog. So take your pick. Any team that you want that's not in the SEC, the Big 12, or the Big 10. Whoever they are is an underdog, and they're not supposed to win anything when it comes to the NCAA level. And if you are a college track athlete who has to ride on a van or a bus for 10 hours or more to get to a meet, my advice is that you sleep as much as you can and you stretch your legs as much as possible. You're going to need it if you have any prayer of putting out a PR on that weekend. I'm Coach Rob, and thank you so much for watching this video. And if you want to see more content like this, then please like and subscribe.